Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first event in the Kangemi Perspectives webinar series. And today's topic, Advice from the C-Suite, How to Get Started with Automated Auditing. My name is Beverly, and I'm the moderator for this event. We are excited to be launching this webinar series, which is made up of 4 dynamic webinars focused on topics that are relevant to the professional audit community. These events will run from May to November, and November will conclude with an interactive panel webinar. And now I'd like to introduce our host, Michael Kangemi, President of Canco Company, and our guest, Bistra Dimitrova. Michael Kangemi is a former CFO, CEO, speaker, and senior advisor to numerous companies. His focus has been to provide continuous auditing, monitoring, and analytic intelligence for GRC, finance, and business process improvement. Michael is a senior fellow at Rutgers University and serves on the Rutgers Continuous Auditing and Reporting Lab Advisory Board. He also serves on FEI's Committee on Finance and Technology and their GRC subcommittee, the EDPAC's Editorial Advisory Board, and the Libra Audit Advisory Board. He is a published author of research papers, articles, and the book, Managing the Audit Function. Michael is joined by Bistra Dimitrova, who is an internal audit manager at Kronos and brings over 8 years of experience to her role. She began using IDEA in 2011 and has designed and implemented various data mining, continuous auditing programs, and key business areas, including T&E, P-card, journal entries, payroll, and more. Her use of data mining and analysis techniques in operational and financial reviews has provided greater assurance to management and has helped achieve compliance requirements. Now, before I let our presenters start the event, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items very quickly. First, everyone on the webinar has been muted. If you have any questions, you can type them into the question box on the webinar panel on your screen. And lastly, a recording of this presentation will be made available to all attendees following the presentation. And so, Michael, that's it for my part. I now turn over the presentation to you and Bistra.
Well, thank you very much, Beverly, for setting this up. It's something I've been looking forward to for a long time. And I want to thank you also for making it happen to get my picture with very low resolution from my college yearbook up on the screen with the new advanced technologies we have today. I know you had a lot of trouble with that. Welcome, everyone. I'll go briefly over the agenda and then jump right into trying to share some valuable information with you today. The agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to start off with some views from the C-suite. What I think makes this unique is my background started in auditing and wound up in the boardroom. So we'll share some views on that. I have, as Beverly said, been focusing on the expanded use of data analytics for the last 10 years. We'll talk about that. The pain points, hopefully, we can help you with some of the challenges and roadblocks as you try to incorporate more analytics. And on that note, Bistra will join in with a presentation on how she has actually implemented it and some of the obstacles she had along the way. At the end, maybe saving the best for last, some of my personal advice to you about how to overcome these obstacles, and we'll have time for questions and answers. So I don't want to belabor I like to present my career progression because a lot of people get curious about how did basically an IT auditor become a CEO one day. And basically, I had the luxury of all my life being very much involved with the profession. So in addition to my career path, which took me through the various chairs, I served as the part-time editor for the ISACA Journal for 20 years. As Beverly mentioned, I'm on the Rutgers Advisory Board for their CAR lab, which is started around 1990. So I've had a window into the expanded use of analytics by auditors and others. And I spent a lot of my excess time working at ISACA and IIA board positions. So fortunately got to write a book about my experiences as a chief auditor. And as you might guess, I don't play golf. I'm very I really do enjoy staying in touch with the profession and economics in general, for just a side note. So I'm going to start at the very highest level. We don't have time to make this deep, but in the C-suite, there's a major focus on a couple of things. When I went to college and took business policies, we were asked to explain what we thought the purpose of a business was. If we had more time, it could make this more interactive. A lot of people answer the question that the purpose of business is to make a product or make a profit. The answer in a high level is to satisfy a customer. And the reason I like to present this is because when I ran the internal audit department of Phelps Dodge Corporation, that's the way I looked at my job. When I was CFO, that's what I looked at. When I was CEO, that's certainly what I looked at. So to give you a higher level focus and get you up from the trees into the forest of governance, risk, and compliance. The second point I like to make is that the C-suite job is really difficult. I used to describe my job as a CEO as playing simultaneously 16 chessboards every day and looking for tactical moves and strategic moves. So you have to kind of move fast. CEOs are responsible for product development, sales, supply chain, P&L, making a profit, and GRC. I think a lot of people in the GRC world sometimes look at what they're doing as unique or different, but I think it's very important to take a look at where you fit within the entire organization. Now, what's happening with CEOs and CFOs today? Beverly mentioned I'm on the FinTech committee of the FEI, which is the Financial Executives CFO organization, and we meet quarterly and discuss what technology we can help use in a company to make the business better. And so right now there's this dramatic shift, as you all know, happening with technology. It just seems to advance more rapidly and more rapidly at each level. So here you have a team of C-suite executives who are being told things like their legacy ERP systems need to be migrated to the best in class on the cloud. Some of these people have spent $700 million putting in these big systems, and now upstarts like Salesforce.com, for example, have better technology. So this isn't, in my longer version of this, I talk about the death of the ERP. It isn't going to die. It's going to stick around for a long time. But there's a migration over to blending new technologies in, and certainly ERP vendors are working on that as well. They're hearing about needing to use data to drive the business with analytical insights. They're hearing about robotic process automation, and they're hearing about cyber security and the threats surrounding that. When I hear those speeches, I'm glad I'm not currently a sitting CEO, because it's just a nightmare to be able to even imagine addressing the new threats in the cybersecurity range. Not a focus of our program today. In addition, the C-suite has suffered, I'll say, through a lot with regard to GRC. So since the Sarbanes-Oxley, the cost of GRC in companies has doubled. Add in the banking crisis, and it just hasn't ended. I'm on the advisory board of a bank here in New Jersey with about $25 billion in assets. They had to add 250 people in the GRC space. Now, you might be happy from the standpoint of job security for GRC people, but that's a pretty dramatic new responsibility. So senior management wants good controls. They want reliable financial information, but they want it to be within the scope of their responsibilities to improve profits and improve ROI. So to stay in step with the C-suite, keep in mind that overhead, any drag on ROI is a big negative. Another area I like to discuss, and if we had a seminar with more time, is the overarching issue for corporate governance. Why do you have a job in GRC? And I think this is something that most GRC people don't go to work every day thinking about. But if you have a private company, you can pretty much do what you want to control however you want. And once you start having to formulate capital either through stock issuances or debt, you are then required to add levels of cost in GRC. So it's not something that's going to be avoided, although I'm going to show you later how the trend is away from it. But I think it's extremely important, and again, I appreciate Caseware setting this up for us, for you to focus for a little while on how you can possibly make the GRC spend more of a positive for the C-suite. So I obviously think it's very important to expand the use of data analytics. GRC activities, as I said, are valuable, but they need to be efficient. And I think you can get in step with the C-suite, who's addressing all these same technology shifts. You could become a bigger part of the team. And if you focus on not just internal control, but business process improvement, at the same time you're addressing internal controls, you'll get a 2-for-1 payback for the C-suite, which will make them very happy. And we're going to go into business process improvement as we go along today. This is a slide that's presented to CEOs and CFOs. It came from Microsoft at one of our committee meetings. And they're showing the C-suite what's happening with the growth of data. Now, the point for us is it's happening. I mean, we're somewhere in the back end of this, and I'm not sure it all played out in the last 3 years to the exact numbers that they think. But basically what's happening is we used to have financial systems that had, very structured files and internal reports, and then we got mobile and we started to get some new data to look at. And then with the advent of cloud storage, the amount of data that is being saved in companies and even on individuals, just think about, your cell phone. I have every picture I've taken in the last 12 years in my cloud. That data is there and needs to be addressed in some way to make it more valuable for the company itself. So that's what C-level people are looking at. Oh, there's this big bunch of data. And then what are internal audit departments, or some of you might be in compliance departments, or some of you might be in finance departments. What are you doing with that data that can help the company and, again, improve internal controls along the way? So a couple of years ago, I got involved with the Institute of Internal Auditors update of their common body of knowledge, which they have to do every maybe every decade. And they did a survey with about 14,000 internal auditors around the world. And then they asked people like me to write up, analyzing some of the results and write up different segments. So there's a whole series of reports that came out of the Institute of Internal Auditors. I'm leaving this slide up there so you can see it's free. You can get it by going to the IIA website, Common Body of Knowledge. So I got to work with a data analyst hired by the IRA to help me parse this information. Pretty much, it's a different application. If an auditor, you're looking at data to find control weaknesses, et cetera. But in this case, it was, hey, let's take a look at how internal auditors are using technology. You can only imagine how great this project was for me, who had decided to spend, a significant amount of my time following the use of analytics and technology. Unfortunately, it was pretty depressing information. There was some confusion. If you do read the report, you'll see between what's a CAT and what's a computer-assisted audit technique. So some of the technology, the questions got a little, impacted by how they were stated with different uses of the same terms. I'm sure any of you who've spent any time working on computer-assisted auditing understand that the terminology is blended. But we were able to group things, so we knew, either a computer-assisted technique or a CAT was pretty much the same thing. But the data of how many people were using it or how many internal audit departments were using was pretty low. As a matter of fact, one of my good friends came up with the idea of, well, rather than just present the way it was in 2015, let's take a look at how it's improved since the last Common Body of Knowledge survey in 2006. So by doing that, we were able to come up with what looks like a positive statistic that it grew by 14%. But even that is not a significantly positive example of how internal auditors have kind of got on this bandwagon and expanded their use of technology. And in that survey, only 4 out of 10 chief executive officers worldwide felt that their department was even using it in an appropriate manner. So you even have the chief audit executives chiming in that there was a need for this. So later I'm going to compare some of the results of this survey with some of the results of a CEO survey, and you'll see how they have a different point of view. So what's happening is the C-suite wants to see expanded use of technology everywhere in their company in a way that improves coverage, lowers costs, gives them better insights into their data, and they want to somehow see a rationalization of this expanded cost of GRC. So what's keeping internal auditors from doing more? Well, from what I've seen and studied and read, and you probably have read some of these same things, many of our skills are sets of the people in internal audit or in accounting and auditing. In the last decade, more and more people are coming in with better IT skills. For me, when I graduated from college, there wasn't even an IT auditing course in the curriculum. So I was sent to IBM, and I got to get a background. I got to learn a lot about technology. Fortunately, the shift is good for us because as the younger people come in, they're learning technology right from their phones. So and the universities have made giant leaps. So part of the problem is, do we have the right skills? Then we find people have problems getting buy-in, getting approvals. And I feel that a lot of people that are in internal audit, even compliance, don't understand how to get budget approvals. And certainly, if it was necessary, it's not really the case with the software we're talking about here in IDEA. It's so inexpensive it fits more into a basic operating budget than having to go get capital. But some of the companies I work with, the software is could be $500,000. Could be built big money, and you have to do capital appropriations. Not many people in internal audit have experience with that. Then you have other priorities. I always talk to internal auditors about the pace of your work. You have a lot of control over the pace of your work, but you have to make sure you do enough to satisfy management. There seems to me to be a lack of creative skills and vision and risk taking. This is a really hard thing to discuss with a large group of people like you, but I'm sure some of you believe you do have the creative skills and the ability to take risks. But it's, to me, one of the examples of why there has been a slower uptake on the use of data analytics. In my view, you have to add value to the business, and you have to figure out how to do that. And we're going to discuss a couple of other ways for you to integrate some of my suggestions into the work you're currently doing. Well, when I became a chief audit executive, there was a problem that was resolved by this COSO framework being issued. The cube that I'm showing here is actually the one that was updated recently, but all the way back in 1990, when we were trying to define internal control, the control environment was listed, control activities was listed, and the need for monitoring was listed. This was not contemplating that we'd have tremendous software tools today like IDEA and the use of analytics that we have today that could sort through all the new data we have today. We weren't even thinking about that. But when I looked at my job as a chief audit executive, I decided that my goal was going to be to improve internal control in the company, not just find weaknesses, but to actually make recommendations on how to improve it. And I found tremendous opportunities because if you're working with operations and looking at controls, you can find ways to implement tools that could help actually make even cash recoveries in the case of using analytics today. So audits of accounts payable, duplicate payments, you could actually find money to contribute back into the company. So I was not against making recommendations to management beyond the scope of internal control and working with management on joint projects. Now, I like to say really briefly, in the 1980s, I used to get tomatoes thrown at me sometimes when I made a speech about this because of independence. So I'm not ignorant of that fact, but I'm going to tell you what I think about that along the way. To me, it's clearly important for internal auditors, compliance departments to help move the ball on the company's mission, and being involved with joint projects is going to be a major suggestion of ours today. This is the 3 lines of defense, which is really interesting. This is an IIA slide, but to me, when I look at the internal audit profession today, I see that you've been infiltrated by the 2nd line of defense, meaning compliance departments. First of all, the 1st line of defense, when I was a CFO and even CEO, we looked to put controls in. I could tell you, number 1 for me was always making sure I got paid for all the products I shipped. So I was very, very interested in that. But along the lines of all the new regulations that have come out, management's responded with this 2nd line growing in enormity. I used to give seminars based on my book and get internal audit managers, and then all of a sudden I started to get all these compliance department managers in. So internal audit, to me, remain relevant, has to really break out from their comfort zone, sometimes constricted by independence, and get involved in the mainstream of the business. So what I say you should do is you need to identify areas that you can find in your company in your company and in your internal audit department work itself. A long time ago, when I was an IT auditor, I used to look for where do I spend the most time as an internal auditor, and then try to figure out how to do that differently, how to automate it. And so I was really an early adopter of IDEA and other technology to make it audit efficient. But in addition, we need, and I started to bring tools when I was chief, national director of IT auditing at BDO. We brought in IDEA and gave people laptops, and this was very early, and started to use technology for efficiency of our work. But beyond just making the internal audit work more efficient, I think it's extremely important to make recommendations to management about how to improve controls and improve the business process along the way. And as I said earlier, partnering when necessary with departments to actually implement that. And you'll hear some good examples from Bistro later, and I could give you some myself. Less independence concerns and more positive deliverables, as I say in my book, finding ways to really make a contribution to the company. I said earlier, we'll go back to the IIA survey. In the Common Body of Knowledge survey, internal auditors were asked what's the most important thing they do. And what they answered was, we assure the adequacy of internal control. Well, think back to the macro I said earlier. What's the purpose of a business? The purpose of a business is to satisfy some customer, sell some product or some service to people that will be happily paying you with a check or cash. Internal auditing through business process or adding value through business process improvement didn't even make the top 5 as perceived by the internal auditors in the survey. Switching over to the CEO survey, now this was not from the IIA survey. This was a Big 4 firm interviewing C-suite people. And what they want is technology-driven business process improvement. And as I said earlier, they're hearing from everybody, how do we use all this data and how do we improve our business model with that? So I think integrating your internal control work with looking for opportunities to improve the business process is the clear way to go. If not, what's happening in the macro again? This is a chart that I just don't think gets into the GRC literature enough. In the last 20 years, we've seen a decline by 50% of the number of public companies. If you think of why the stock market's up so high, and just go back to Economics 101, supply and demand, there's half the companies, and yet everybody's 401k clicks along every month. More money goes into the stock market, and it has to be put some percentage into stocks. So, I mean, I think this is a reaction to the Sarbanes-Oxley and the banking industry regulations that came in and made the cost of GRC so onerous. To give you some real examples before I come back and close it out with discussion of how to overcome the obstacles in a little bit more detail, we thought it would be very good to have someone who had recently done an implementation. So I met Bistra at a Caseware Idea user conference. I think we were in Florida, and just listening to her talk about what she did, we thought would make a beautiful combination for what I'm telling you more from the sea level. She's from the right in the trenches level. So Bistra, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. I'm going to start with a brief overview of Kronos. We are the leading provider of workforce management and human capital management solutions that enable organizations to control labor costs, minimize compliance risk, and improve workforce productivity. We have more than 40 million people who use Kronos every day, tens of thousands of organizations in over 100 countries, including more than half of the Fortune 1000 companies use Kronos products. We have close to 6,000 employees worldwide. We are privately held, and we have over 1 billion in revenue. At the same time, we have a very small internal audit team. And this is how we did internal audits when I joined Kronos 8 years ago. We were using a sample-based audit approach. We would obtain a list of transactions in a given area and randomly select 25 to 50 transactions and would review them, hoping to find the needle in the haystack. Needless to say, we didn't find the needle in the haystack. Our results were more around minor policy violations. We were only able to focus on the data from one system at a time. For instance, if we're reviewing vendor spend, we couldn't combine the information from the AP subledger with the Picard spend data to see the total spend per vendor. We weren't able to do that. We knew we needed a tool to improve the effectiveness of our audit process. And we were in the search of one. In my previous job, I briefly tried to use ACL. However, at that time, 8 years ago, ACL didn't seem that user-friendly to me. And then during my first year at Kronos, the three of us, like our audit team, watched a webinar, and the person was showing some of the tests they did with IDEA. And that seemed very easy. So we were, maybe we can do that. So I had the educational version of IDEA from the Institute of Internal Auditors, and we tried it, and it worked. So we called automation, and we spoke to Donna, the salesperson there. We bought IDEA, and we never regretted, and we never looked back. So this is how we are doing audits right now using IDEA. We have adopted holistic audit approach, and that's executed on 100% of the population. We are enriching audit-related data through combining data from different systems. For instance, we're combining T&E data with travel data just to see flight departure and arrival dates, hotel checkout dates. This way, we have a better understanding of the data, and we can look for specific infractions within the data. We are better equipped to find the needle in the haystack. And in some cases, actually, we did find the needle in the haystack. Our work resulted in more meaningful audit results, pointing to real pain points. Some cases, our audit work led to strong disciplinary actions and hard dollar recoveries. We got the management and audit committee's attention, which resulted in company-wide changes in some instances. Confidence in the internal audit team's capabilities skyrocketed. And this is, this is what I call the risk funnel, and this is how we do our audits. currently. So with IDEA, we are creating this risk funnel. We start with the full population of the data, and then we create a number of tests that are specific for the area under the review, and we continue to slicing and dicing until we isolate the so-called risk-based population. For example, we start with like 400,000 lines, and we keep slicing and narrowing until we get to manageable population of maybe 3,000 lines, where we are actually able to audit 100% this risk-based population. With this approach, we can also provide close to 100% assurance that the transactions outside of the risk-based population are in compliance. And now when we go into our exit meetings, we don't start our conversations with, well, we have randomly selected 25 to 50 transactions, and we have found, for example, that 5 or 6 transactions weren't processed appropriately, and we extrapolate that the exposure is X amount. We start our conversation with, we have examined 100% of the transactions processed by your department, and we have found that, for example, 20% of these transactions are not in compliance. Here is the list of the transactions, and this is how much their total is. It is completely, it is definitely more meaningful and more powerful, more strong conversation. I mean, there is, it's much easier to defend our results. I mean, when you have the data behind your observation, it's really, really hard, and it's very rare to refute the observation. And the beauty of this is that everything is repeatable. We can run the tests as often as we need it. So we can run them 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road. So once we have the tests, we can repeat them as many times as we want, and we just get a new set of data, and we can do follow-up very easy. These are some of our IDEA wins. Some of them go back 5, 6 years ago, but I think they're still relevant. One of our biggest wins is the T&E and PCARD programs. We have identified multiple fraudulent disbursements that resulted in strong disciplinary actions, hard dollar recoveries. This resulted in significant process change and investment. Journal entries, we've provided a roadmap to the senior management to address these issues such as multiple reversals and rebooking of the same journal entry, adequate journal entry support. As a result of our work, a new company-wide manual journal entry policy was issued. Another example of our win is the vendor spend review that we did. We again provided a roadmap to the senior management to address issues such as duplicate vendor payments, timely issuance of POs. As a result of our work, we were able to recover some of the duplicate payments that the company made to the vendors. And new revised authorization levels were adopted company-wide. We have started expanding the use of IDEA beyond the world of internal audit. Just as Michael said, we are trying to work with the business so we can add more value to the business. One of our, again, wins is the revenue recognition, the new revenue recognition standard AC 606. We are currently in the adoption stage, and we are trying to implement a new system that would help us recognize the revenue going forward. In order to get the system up and running, we are loading data going back 3 to 5 years ago, which is like over 1 million lines. And with the IDEA, I was able to identify some data inconsistencies that were addressed prior to soft launch, so that we didn't end up loading the new system with bad data. Another example is our external auditor support. We were able to leverage IDEA's capabilities to assist our external auditors in implementing their data analytics approach for auditing our financial statements. This resulted in significant decrease in the sample sizes for testing and substantially less work that was felt across the entire finance team.
Okay, I'm back and we'll move on from Bistra's presentation. As you could see, she's had great success and provides good examples of utilization of analytics. So what I'd like to talk about a little now is that we see a lot, or I see a lot of webinars like this on how, how to use it. Where am I using it? So this one obviously has a different projection. I said I would come back to overcoming obstacles. So I hear often that you go to the CFO's office and ask for a budget for a package, an analytics package-like idea or training, because you do need some of that, or even some consulting support sometimes, which you're going to need, and you get turned down. When I have one-on-ones with internal auditors, I usually ask, well, what do you do about that? And they usually tell me nothing. So I like to tell this story. As a CFO, I would have control over the capital expenditure budget and to some degree the operating expense budget. So I had various managers coming to me all the time, asking for money, asking for expense, and I would almost always start. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got you. Thank you. I have to press one more button here. It's not working. All right, now it is. Just got to go back one. Sorry about this. A little glitch with the computer. I think you've got it now. Hopefully. Oh. Okay. So my advice to you is that when you get the first no, that's a sort of a test of your resolve, and maybe you're not putting together a good enough presentation on why they should be doing it. So you need to regroup and keep pitching for additional funds. In terms of other priorities and time restriction, I just think you need to make this a priority. I mean, if it hasn't been pushed to the forefront, I think you'll find the internal audit department not being considered in the positive light that it should be. If your skills are weak, you need to get training. So if you listen to Bistra, she first watched a video and then got interested in an idea, and over time has gone to the user conferences and actually learned how to do it. So you can overcome that. The big problem I see is the creativity skills. I get excited about finding value in a company and changing a process that makes everybody, makes more profit or reduces waste. So we had a process in our company that anytime we had a problem, we went to the root cause of it, looked for ways to make things work with high imagination and low cost. And we applauded that on our team whenever it happened. I'll give you an example that has, it's not really an analytics example. When the internet started, we built a web business to sell our products over the web. And initially it was really a slow start. We got orders, we printed them, we circulated them in a normal way in the warehouse. And then our retail department, retail division said, we need to ship within a day. This was a long time ago when we first started with the internet. And one of my guys came up with an idea one day to make a real quick fix. He just made a little program change to route all of our internet orders to a specific printer in the warehouse. And he went to the warehouse management and said, anytime anything prints on that, pick it and ship it ahead of everything else. Creative, high imagination, low cost solution to a problem. When you look at your internal audit budget and where you're spending your time, you need to attack the areas that are very time consuming and maybe, as Bistra said, maybe not as productive, where you're looking at a sample of 50, you could be looking at the entire population. Is that going to come with problems? Yes. You're going to have a lot of false positives, and you're going to have to tweak your analytics approach. This is stuff that everybody's been through now. That's why I tell people working with a vendor that has a lot of good experience could be a help. In one example of one of the analytics companies I work with, a big US company wanted to implement 17 analytics tests on something. And they told them, you better start with 3 or 4. So it's advice like that so that you can begin the process, hone the analytics until they get to a place where you get reasonable amount of data to analyze. And I'm sure Bistra has been through this, where you could then hone it to the point where it works very smoothly. IT projects, I learned from my years at ISACA, they fail often. They're very complicated, and obviously there's been people that have gone past those complications and past the failures and made things happen. If you look at the technology sector of the stock market right now, these companies are booming. But there is some risk to it, and I find internal auditors are somewhat risk averse. You have to break out of that shell. I'm sure Bistra had some days she worried her program wouldn't work as well as it has. The other thing that mitigates that to a large degree, in my opinion, is working with a company that could back you up and support you in the times of troubles. And as I said a number of times, you need to add value to the business, so don't just look for internal control improvements, look for business process improvements as well. And I'm hoping my slide moved forward. ISACA just recently put out a report that talks about the future of IT audit. And I think this quote from the incoming chair of ISACA, Brennan Baybeck, who's also a global IT risk manager at Oracle, says a lot. Enterprises are exploring ways to be driven digitally, identifying technologies and paths to deliver more value more quickly, by also benefiting from efficiencies. That's what I said CEOs are looking for in general. And in his view, IT auditors must do the same thing, which is pretty much what I'm saying, and remain valued partners with the organizations that they work with. I want to give an example here of how I used analytics outside of internal audit. So I was the CEO of a company that was wholesale and retail. We had 72 retail stores. We had a very, very low inventory loss statistic each year. But you'd always lose inventory. Somebody stealing in a store or someplace, you have a problem. So I kept getting a request as CFO first and then as CEO for a loss prevention department at a great cost of about $500,000 a year. And I always said no, because our inventory shrink was so small, I didn't think I was going to get an ROI on $500,000. What I did instead was talk to our software developers that were putting in the point of sale systems in our stores and ask, how could we look at the data coming out of the POS system and sift through it for unusual items? Well, what's an unusual item? So we had to be creative. We said, well, if we had 3 or 4 returns in a store where there were no sales for 1 hour before or 1 hour after, maybe a sales clerk was taking the product to the cash register, putting through a fake return, putting the product in the back room, sending it back to the warehouse like it was a return, and taking the cash. By implementing that, and many others like that, we would then feed our regional managers or regional retail district managers that oversaw the stores with this information. They would interview people sometimes, talk to the store manager about it. And we had 1 or 2 people actually confess. We had store managers quit, but that system has grown and expanded. So it's a creative use, high imagination, low cost analytics, improves the business. Nobody complained about the cost. We wound up paying a small amount more for our software with that great improvement. I guess from the C-suite, what I'll tell you is you have to take risks. You have to step out of your comfort zone and do some things that are different. Winston Churchill, as you all know, was a great leader, and he made this comment, which I tell audiences all the time. You have enemies, good, that means you've stood up for something sometime in your life. So maybe it's your analytics program, or maybe that's too dramatic an example, but I like it. So in summary, what we're trying to portray today is how you could, or how you should, and maybe some ideas on how to stay in step with management. Certainly don't live in the isolated world of GRC. Remember, you're part of a bigger process, a bigger company, a bigger program, something that's set into action in order to satisfy a customer and build a business. It's important to expand the use of technology in general, and analytics has, right now is in very high demand and in very active expansion mode. Partnering with finance operations is to do both BPI and GRC is a winning strategy. I can give many examples where that has happened. Let me just touch on independence here for a second. Independence, in my mind, is in your head. You have to be independent, but working with the accounts payable area to implement an analytics program that can get duplicate payments back, that could give you ideas on how to change your process to reduce or eliminate, for example, duplicate payments, is not an impediment to your independence. You can still come back and audit that. You can build analytics audit routines on top of it. There's all different ways to address it. Not doing it because of independence and taking that shortcut leap out is not a good idea anymore. And it's important to work with companies, as I've said a few times, that have training and support. I'm not a technologist. I'm not a programmer. When I put in the use of analytics and idea at BDO Seaman, we relied heavily on help from the vendor, and I don't think that's a bad thing for us to do. And so I'll leave it there. I'll turn it back over to Beverly, and she can take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Bistra. I do have a few questions from our audience, and I'll start with you, Michael. This one's for you. This guest said you had mentioned that we should look for ways to help the business, but how does that impact internal audit's independence?
Independence is, in my opinion, it's a state of mind. When I got promoted to the CAE level in my company, I got invited to an officers and directors dinner, and I sat next to the CEO, who introduced me as the resident tough guy. And I never ever thought of myself as a tough guy. But I challenged things in the company, and I challenged the way we did things, and I got credit for doing that. So independence doesn't mean that you cannot participate in something. So people would tell me, oh, you can't recommend a process or a control process. It has to come from the first line of defense or the second line of defense, because you have to audit it. I completely disagree with that. You could recommend a control process, you can recommend a business process improvement and still be independent. If you think you did it wrong, or if you have a better idea later, then you just change it. So remember, you're part of the business, and don't let independence inhibit your ability to contribute.
Great. I have another question pertaining to the COSO. This question is, do you think that the update is more of a redesign, looking at the way that it's added culture, or do you think it could be redefined with a little bit more depth?
No, I thought it was very good. I was on the COSO board for a year and a half, and it's remarkable the information that they put up. But here's the problem. Internal control is not like auditing a financial statement where there's kind of a definitive answer. You either have the P&L right or materially close. You know, the cash is the cash, the inventory is the inventory. Internal control is different in every company. So it's a yeoman's task to even try to define internal control for any particular company. But the framework works. It stood the test of time. Back when I was a chief audit executive, we were following the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act requirement that you have a system of internal control. And that led us all, in the internal audit profession at that time, to say, well, what is a system of internal control? And COSO came in and filled that gap with the framework. But remember, it's just a framework. It doesn't fit for every organization. The key things for me to take away from it is that they want you to do monitoring. And I think that, that just plays up into the analytics theme that we've had today. It's the greatest ability to monitor ever. I mean, I used to get very upset at the toll collecting system in New Jersey, where they would give me a violation every time they couldn't read my reader. And now they've gone on to where they check everybody's license plate, have the computer check to see if that license plate's connected to an account. They're continuously monitoring everything. Amazon sends you a package. They're monitoring the package. You get a text every step of the way. Management's aware of the ability to use analytics and to use monitoring. So that's why I think it's so important for you to do it too.
I have a question for Bistra. In your example of pulling the data from different ERP systems, how did you handle all of the cleansing of that data?
If by cleansing meaning converting them from one format to a different format. So we as an internal audit have access, read-only access, because we don't want to touch anything inadvertently and change it. We have access to all of our systems. So if I need the data from different systems, we go there and run the data ourselves. And then we import them in IDEA, and we're trying to figure it out, the join field. And then we're trying to see, okay, that if it's like the biggest issue I have is with the dates, because sometimes they go date, like they go European, like which is day, month, year, or like US where it's like month, date, year. So this is, I use IDEA, create an extra field, make it in the same format, and then I join them. But inevitably there is maybe like up to less than, like maybe up to 1% of the records that are not always, like you cannot fit them, so you have to export, manipulate them, and then re-import them in IDEA. So that's why I usually say close to 100% assurance, because inevitably we have these couple of records that didn't conform, and we had to manually make them to conform.
Thank you, Bistra. Our next question is, for an experienced auditor, what is the best way of getting started or transitioning to audit technology and gaining mastery in applying data analytics? So I guess what are the...
For me?
Yeah, I would say, why don't we start with you, Bistra, and then we'll conclude with Michael.
So when we started, I mean, IDEA is really easy to work. However, you still need to invest the time to learn it a little bit. When I started back 8 years ago, the IDEA help desk, I mean, I was constantly on the phone with them. Gradually, when I started using it more and more, I stopped calling them because I know how to work with IDEA. When we hired the senior auditor with us, I showed her how to use IDEA, the basics, and then we sent her to IDEA classes so she can understand more how to use IDEA. So it is easy. I mean, providing you have the tool, but you still need to invest the time. like you have to have the motivation to learn something new and to invest the time to learn it.
Well, I can't add much to that. I think she's absolutely right on all scores, and she's giving you her personal experience. I'll just say this about the data itself. If you don't get into the data and find the anomalies, you're probably not doing a good job auditing anyway. When I started back in the day doing CATs, for example, in an insurance company, we focused on premiums, and we took the premiums file and we thought we were doing an audit of premiums by selecting a sample. When we tried to manipulate the file with a computer, we found out there were 14 different transaction types. And that's, that's an obstacle, or is that really doing the audit? We found out, for example, in this case, that there was approvals required to make a discount to a premium. But we also found that people were putting through bracketed increases to a premium to bypass that control. So until you get your hands on all the data and work your way through making it reconcile and making it useful for your analytics program, you really don't understand the system. And that's the way auditing was done a long time ago. It's not the way it's going to be done in the future. So you got to get on the bandwagon of playing with the data.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Do you have, I believe this is for Bistra, do you have experience or any comments that you can make regarding the challenges of getting data from management?
I mean, as I mentioned, we have read-only access to most of our systems. So we usually run our reports by ourselves. And then we are independent. We have our audit charter, so we don't run into many issues of not getting the data. Like in the beginning, we had issues. Well, we'll give you the data, but it's more in PDF or more it's in TXT format. And with idea, I would be sure, give me the data. Give me the data in any format that you can, and then I work with it. So it's not a matter of not getting the data. It's a matter of in what format would you get the data. But again, it's not an issue. We can get the data and we work with the data. So I'm not sure if I can get any more advice.
Okay, well, it's 2 o'clock Eastern Time, so I think that's going to be a wrap for this session. So thank you, Michael, for delivering an informative webinar, and Bistra for sharing your experiences and achievements with technology. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Our next event will take place in July, so look out for your email, getting notification from us in June about that. For anyone who hasn't asked questions but still would like to ask questions, you can send them to us at connect@caseware.com, and either Michael, Bistra, or a member of the Caseware team will answer your question via email. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining our webinar today. Have a great day.